Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. For those of you who are not familiar with me, my name is Deb, and I'm from Stratham, New Hampshire, and co-founder of New Hampshire for Safe Technology, along with Jen White and Lori Schreier. A little bit about my journey on how I got to wireless. In the fall of 2017, we had scheduled to have our home measured for RF on our return from a hiking trip out west. I had planned to come off blood thinners and was aware that wireless could potentially thicken the blood. So I thought that might be a prudent precaution. I'd been having other issues with insomnia, tinnitus, heart arrhythmia, palpitations, tooth and jaw pain, dry eye, facial flushing, dizziness, and blood pressure. I had developed severe pressure headaches that felt like my brain was swollen or on fire. I had great difficulty thinking, speaking, and remembering. I even got lost several times in the town I've lived in for nearly 40 years. I did not yet know that it was all related until we removed the wireless from our home and cars. My health quickly improved. My seemingly unrelated symptoms disappeared. Interestingly, the plant in my kitchen that sat there doing nothing for a year suddenly grew 15 inches in just 2 months. That was an eye-opener to everyone in my family, as it's much easier to believe what you can actually see. Realizing this issue, it ultimately affects everyone. I stepped way out of my comfort zone, despite knowing others certainly will think I must be crazy. And I reached out to legislators. My state rep, Patrick Abrami, was truly exceptional. He actually listened and responded. He investigated the science and was successful getting New Hampshire to pass the first U.S. law to begin addressing technology safety. The New Hampshire Commission on Health and Environmental Effects of Wireless Technology was established in the fall of 2019 and produced a groundbreaking report in the fall of 2020. The New Hampshire Commission report is a great place to become informed, to empower you to protect yourself, your family, and your community by becoming aware and learning how to use technology safely. We at New Hampshire for Safe Tech, along with Cece Doucette of Mass for Safe Tech, are supporting the Commission's work by hosting information sessions like this, and we thank you all for being here. With that, I will turn it over to our co-host and speaker, Cece Doucette.
Oh, thank you so much, Deb. I'm so grateful to be here, and I'm so grateful that people keep coming to these webinars. I know some of you have been with us before, and I get reports from you that, oh, you know, I tried this and it's working, so I've come back and I'm going to learn a little bit more and then try something else. So that's what we hope we can do, and also to help inspire you once you get your own spaces taken care of, to start thinking more broadly about your community and what we might do to put precautions in place to safeguard your community as powerfully as we can within the current laws. So with that, I'm going to do a screen share. Deb, can you check on the screen sharing again for me? Oh, you're muted.
It's not allowing you to screen share?
Nope. If you go down to the screen share box, there's a little caret there, and if you click that, it should be able to say that multiple participants can share simultaneously.
It doesn't say anything.
Okay. Oh, it's allowing me to now. Let me bring this up. Okay. Can you give me a nod if you can see my screen, Deb? Okay, great. Thank you. So after tonight's presentation, in the coming days, we will send out my slides so that anything that you see with a underline on it is a live link that you'll be able to go into and drill through and read the science and the information for yourself. Because we like to say, you know, we got a pretty good head start on most people investigating this, but don't take our word on any of it. Go and know the facts for yourself so that you can then return to them and share with others as you see fit. So again, my name is Cece Doucette. That MTPW after my name just means I had the privilege of earning a master's in technical professional writing. from Northeastern University. We're getting a bit of an echo off of somebody. Thank you for muting. And like most folks, I had no idea there was anything to even question as to whether there were safety issues around wireless. And then one night at book group, a girlfriend of mine was reading the book Zapped by Anne Louise Gittleman, and she was tipping us off that there looked to be biological effects. So that's where my journey began, but that was just book group, and I kind of just made a mental note of it. But not long after that, something else crossed my desk inferring the same thing. So I thought, wow, if there's anything to this, I ought to know, because I spent 8 years running our school district's education foundation, bringing in all this wireless technology that now I understand was the industry telling us we needed it so our kids could succeed in the world. So I ran campaign after campaign to get wireless infrastructure in our schools, to get iPads and Chromebooks and smart boards and minis and what we thought was all this great new technology. So being a technical and professional writer, I thought, well, is there any science behind these claims of harm? So I just started scratching the surface, and I was just astounded that you don't have to dig very far at all to literally find thousands of studies all over the world showing great biological harm. And so I raised my hand with my schools, and it was definitely not an easy conversation to have, because the industry, as we learned, had already gotten in at the state level and embedded technology into the curriculum. So if our schools don't comply, then their very jobs could be on the line with our school administrators. So I was very proud of our schools that, and unbeknownst to me at the time, but we became the first in the nation to even have this little precautionary sign hanging in all of our classrooms saying, turn off the devices when you're not using them. Otherwise, they're going to pulse radiation at you all the time. Turn the Wi-Fi systems on only when you need them, the wireless access points. And as we'll see in the fine print in a minute, always place the device on a solid surface and not your body, and we'll show you what's in there in a minute. So I realized, though, that this was just a sign hanging in our classrooms, and our schools were actually waiting for higher authorities to tell them what to do. So I went to Senate President Karen Spilka here in Massachusetts. She's our district senator, and she and I had worked together for years with the Education Foundation, and she's a really good public servant. So I went to office hours with her and her district director, and I showed them the science, and I showed Ashland's little sign, and then I measured the radiation coming from their devices, and both the laptop and the cell phone went right off the charts into the red zone, and they're looking at me like, really? And I said, yes, and nobody has any idea. Just like with drugs, tobacco, alcohol, gambling, pornography, adults will make their choices, but it's our moral obligation to protect the children and at least give everybody the right to know. So I asked my senators, there's something you can do from where you sit to give the public the right to know. So she put me with a lawyer in her office, and together we whittled out a very simple bill back in 2014 that would bring the right minds to the state level, form a commission, and investigate. And we have had many bills in Massachusetts. Some we've gotten out of committee, but then they've never been passed into law. Fortunately, when Deb opened that conversation with her state representative, Patrick Abrami, he's an engineer, and our engineers have only been taught you have to have a lot of heat from a device to have harm. So she taught him what she was learning in the science, that the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission, allows, this much radiation, and the science is showing you don't have to have heat. There are biological effects happening at that non-thermal, non-heat level at hundreds of thousands of times below the transmissions that the FCC and the industry keep allowing. So we're so very grateful that we were able to meet with Rep. Abrami, help him connect the dots further, and then he wrote a really good bill that we'll share with you momentarily. And on this crazy journey, I've had the privilege of connecting with many of the world's leading scientists and doctors and public health experts and attorneys and captains of industry. And so we now have a little course with our little nonprofit, Wireless Education, and literally in a half an hour online, we can train an entire town, school district, workforce on what the risks are and what the science and the medically recommended best practices are to have amazing technology, but without radiating ourselves and everything around us. So I invite everybody to go check out this little course, our Schools and Families course. It might give you the courage to point other people there because it's a very healthy, neutral, fact-based place to send people. And then we had a forum, a briefing at the State House here in Massachusetts. And I went up to the State House and I was just so heartened to find an entire room full of people who knew about this issue, because on my journey for the first 2 years, I didn't have anybody to talk to. And it's not a popular conversation to start because everybody has been sold on the convenience of their devices. So having gone to the State House, I was able to connect with other people all across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And ultimately, we founded Massachusetts for Safe Technology. And if you go out here, you'll find pages for everything that we've got going on at the state level. You'll find news articles in our local outlets because mainstream media is owned by the wireless industry or their parent companies, and they very rarely report on this issue. You know, sit down for an hour of prime time and count how many ads you see for the telecom and the cable industry. So at Massachusetts for Safe Technology, we have a news page where local outlets are reporting on this issue. So if you open the conversation with somebody and they're immediately going to think, you know, tinfoil hat conspiracy theorist. But if you can invite them to come to our website, they will see that there is so much going on with this issue that people are just kept in the dark about. So feel free to go out there. We've got tools for you to use, how to get started with this conversation and to engage with other groups who have also been working on this. And then somebody down at the National Institutes of Health found my work and asked me if I would co-chair the technology panel for the Health in Buildings Roundtable Conference. And this was an amazing conference of government organizations, of green organizations like LEEDS. We had urban planners, we had city planners, we had hospitals and architects and all sorts of people in the healthy building space. And most of them were just hearing about wireless radiation impacts for the first time. So they videotaped our panel and all of our talks are less than 10 minutes. So this is a good link to share with others who you want to establish immediate credibility with. So I did the opening remarks. Dr. Martin Paul is one of the leading scientists in this area. And in 10 minutes, he tells us straight out what this is biologically doing to us. We had Frank Clegg, who's the retired president of Microsoft Canada. And when he retired, he began to wonder when other Canadians approached him, what do we really know about wireless harms? So he sought out a dozen of the world's leading experts and came back and said, Canada's Safety Code 6 is not safe, and neither is the FCC's public radiation limit guidelines. So it's really encouraging to hear from a captain of industry kind of whistleblowing on this. And then we had Theodora Spirato, who's the executive director of the Environmental Health Trust, and she talks about areas all over the world where they're already doing much better with safety around this than we are here in the US. And Peter Sullivan joined us. He used to be a fighter pilot, kind of like Top Gun. And he was an engineer in Silicon Valley, like his friends invented the cell phone. And he wound up getting really sick, lost a lot of weight. His teeth started getting brittle. And, you know, granted, he's up there in, you know, the stratosphere up there with his plane that's got radar on it, that's got all the instrumentation in the panels and stuff. So Peter got overexposed to microwave radiation and got very sick. And then when his two sons came into the preschool years, both of his boys were diagnosed on the autism spectrum. And so Peter did what most or many families do with an autistic family member. They will look to the diet and get all the toxins out of the diet, eat a clean organic base. And then he also did the heavy metal detox to get the excessive heavy metals out of the body. And today he tells families, do a digital detox, get the person with autism away from the radio frequency radiation transmissions. And we very often see big changes in health and communication capabilities. And today, Peter's two sons are grown young men, and neither of them are on the autism spectrum anymore. And I had never even heard anybody say that was an option. So we certainly wouldn't want to overpromise, and everybody is biologically different, but it's amazing the changes that people see simply by learning and taking a chance on reducing their exposures. So please feel free to share those short video clips. And then one of the major gaps that we had when I first got involved in this issue is so many people were sick and getting misdiagnosed. And we didn't have any way to train healthcare practitioners. Today we do. The first medical conference was held in person in 2019, and then it took 2 years to plan the next one, and it was expanded, and we had international experts, US experts at the EMF Medical Conference 2021. And as we were gearing up for that one, the pandemic hit. And so we had to step back and figure out how to deliver a whole conference on a platform that none of us had ever used. So a lot of time and investment was made to bring this EMF Medical Conference to market. And so it's been reaccredited even since then. And now there are 24.5 continuing medical education credits plus 24.5 continuing education credits for nurses. So we've done the doctor track and the nurses track. And please know that our local firefighters need to have continuing education credits too. And they really appreciate that this conference is online now because they can take it from the firehouse when they're not out in the community. So please use these resources to extend out to those in your circle who should be trained, who should know about EMS, kind of everybody, but we have such amazing resources today that we did not have many years ago. So that's me and how I got involved. And next, I want to share with you, if anybody has an iPhone with you, I invite you to take that out right now. And I'm going to walk you through the legal fine print that I think is what made my schools take notice and actually take action by putting our little sign up in our classrooms. So from settings in an iPhone, scroll down just a little bit and hit general. From general, go all the way down to legal and regulatory. On an old phone, you do about, but most people have been talked into updating their phones. So now we go, instead of just remembering the acronym GAL, today it's just GL. So once you're in legal and regulatory, about 4 down, you'll see RF exposure. That's this radio frequency, two-way microwave radiation. It's also referred to as the EMFs, or the electromagnetic fields, that we just discussed with the medical conference. And it all, in general terms, means the same. It's this spiked pulse microwave signal that is being emitted many, many times a second. So there's something in the science called Schumann's resonance, and Schumann discovered what the Earth's natural electromagnetic field is. And that pulses electrons up to you and I 7.8 times a second. That's a hertz. You know, a hertz is 7 times a second it pulses, 7.83 hertz. What we've done with man-made radiation is in the megahertz range, which a lot of our technology runs off of. like that's 1,000,000 times per second that it's going spike, 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 spike. Here I am, where are you? Here I am, where are you? I want to connect, I want to connect. 1,000,000 times per second, and the Earth does about 7 times per second. In the gigahertz range, we are in the billions of spikes of this pulsed microwave radiation per second, 1,000,000,000 times per second. So our poor bodies, our poor planet, our poor pollinators, flora, fauna, this is overpowering us. And we'll take a closer look at the science in a second. So this fine print warning has been in there all along, and most of us had no idea. If you don't have an iPhone, if you're on a different platform, you know, an Android or a Google phone or whatever, you can go to a website called See the Fine Print, and a lot of the disclaimers are in there, or you can just go search it yourself, put in your phone make and model, and then type in RF exposure, and the disclaimer comes up. But what that legal fine print tells us is a couple of really important things. One, this device was tested at a distance from the body. So if you're putting it in your bra or your shirt or your suit pocket, if you're tucking it in your waistband or your back pocket, you're exceeding the FCC limits for public radiation exposure. And guess what? That was never biologically safety tested. And so we have no protections in place. A little further down in the fine print, they say if you would like to reduce your exposure, use a hands-free option. So don't touch this radiating device. Use a headset or a speakerphone. And I'm going to come out of the screen share for a second to show you what a recommended headset might look like. And kind of like a doctor's stethoscope, where it's just a hollow tube that comes up to the head, and then they get a good read on your biological heartbeat and all that good stuff. That's kind of how these hollow tube or air tube headsets work too. So you can go out and find a hollow tube or an air tube headset. You see, it's all just rubber and plastic. I had seen one that had magnets at the neck, so you could hang it around your neck when you don't have it in your ear. And I thought, oh, that's kind of handy. And then I went, wait a minute. We know through the science that metal amplifies the radiation. So you don't want to be putting metal up to your head, especially if you're plugged in on the other end to a radiating device, because the metal will transmit that radiation. And any ambient radiation like that coming off your phone will also be attracted to the metal on your head. So a nice long cord, you plug it in, you set your phone as far away from you as you can. It's got a little acoustic control here for muting and volume. And then it's got these little ferrite beads that break the radiation and stop it from traveling up, but you still get the good acoustics. So look for an air tube or a hollow tube headset. So what I discovered, and this was recommended at the EMF medical conference, is that there are devices that can be purchased to measure this invisible toxin, because if the pandemic taught us anything, we need to be vigilant about invisible exposures in our environment. So knowing what I know in my home, I've done my best to reduce the radiation exposure levels to as low as reasonably achievable. That as low as reasonably achievable is the ALARA principle. And our Centers for Disease Control and Protection here in the US already recognizes for like X-rays and the sun and gamma rays, you need to take precautions in 3 areas. 1, create as much distance from something that's radiating. 2, spend as little time around the radiation as possible. And 3, if you can't get away from it, then you need to shield yourself. So we want to encourage everybody to march toward that ALARA principle with distance, time, and shielding. So I've done the best I can in my house. And so I'm going to turn on this broadband radio frequency detection meter. It's called the Safe and Sound Pro 2 by Safe Living Technologies. And this is what was recommended for doctors to put into their medical practices, to loan out to their patients. And so in my house, like right now, it's at 8.9. That's the maximum spike of radiation. And the unit of measurement is something called a microwatt per square meter. So basically in like 3 feet of air, how much radiation am I exposed to? The science wants us to be at 10 or less in our indoor spaces. Some people who are electromagnetically sensitive can do okay if it's 100 or less, but the science is recommending 10 or less. So a nice, clean, green reading in my home. But I want to give you a demonstration of what happens when we expose ourselves to something like a cell phone. And as a rule, I keep my cell phone in airplane mode, and I forward my cell phone calls to my landline. And everybody by now knows how to get me through my landline or to just shoot me an email. Wow. So this is blowing off the far end of my device here, not only into the red, but into the flashing red. And that's really bad. So I'm gonna put my cell phone back in airplane mode, and then I'll tell you what just happened. And we see it takes a few seconds to dissipate. And then I come back down to a clean green reading. So we were at 8 before, just by turning on my cell phone, where the cellular and data antenna, the Bluetooth antenna, the Wi-Fi, the locator, the hotspot, those are all separate antennas in there pulsing this radiation, unless we simply know and choose to do better. So we were at 8. I turned that on, and it went to 560,000 microwatts per square meter. And we want to be at the little number 10. So as we go through the science, it'll make sense to you now why we see so many biological effects. So I'm going to go back into my screen share now. And I actually went after a grant from my town. We had a pot of money that distributes throughout our community. And I became the first in the nation to put one of these meters. I got this one back in 2016. Today, I would recommend the Safe and Sound Pro 2 in that same just shy of $400 price range, because it has a few more updated features on it, like you can plug it in, and it does some other things. So then a doctor and I went after a grant for the Newton Public Library here in Massachusetts, out in Pittsfield, Massachusetts, where Verizon put a cell tower on top of a neighborhood that caused children and adults and pets to become so sick that they've had to abandon their homes. Their public library has put one on loan as well. And for anybody with this today, I encourage you to go to your libraries and say, most libraries have an library of things today, which I didn't know, but they've got all sorts of things they loan out into the community, not just books and videos and stuff. So it's not a reach for them to look into their budget. In my case, we went through a grant from our select board. This one was a cultural council grant, and this library paid for it outright. So please feel free to open up that conversation in your community too. And if you're looking to educate in your community, our local cable stations are fantastic. They're like the last bastion of independent reporting left, because the wireless industry and other big corporations pretty much own all the messaging that comes through mainstream media today. And so we do a lot of programming through our local cable stations. And just this month, I was invited to have my own show in Worcester, Massachusetts, and we'll be sharing videos that you can then share in your community too. And oftentimes the cable stations will borrow content from another cable station and put it up in their own community. So please know we're doing our best to get nicely packaged information for you guys to share in your community. But my cable station came to my home, and we did a walkthrough with my meter to show common radiation exposures today, from the microwave oven, from our cell phones, from the decked cordless phones, from the laptops and the routers. And so this 23-minute public service announcement might be helpful for just kind of saying, gee, where do I need to be looking, or to share it with a loved one. So tap into your local cable stations. They're wonderful. So we'll spend the next few minutes talking about the science. And first we'll look at the long-term effects, and then we'll move into the short-term effects. So the industry got into some hot water back in the 1990s when the first oncologist pieced together that his patient had died from these unusual tumors on the side of her brain, not in the middle of the brain where they would normally, start forming. And he made the connection that that's exactly where the antennas lined up with where she got her tumors. So for years, the industry would spin it that, there's no scientific studies, there's no evidence of harm. And so way back 2 decades ago, our Food and Drug Administration commissioned the U.S. National Toxicology Program, which is part of the National Institutes of Health and Environmental Services, to do a study. And they did. And at the end of almost 2 decades, they held an unprecedented 3-day peer review at the National Institutes of Health with leading experts from all over the world. And they concluded clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage and a host of other findings. And anytime a good study comes out, the industry gets a hold of it and says, oh, that's just one study. You need more studies to corroborate that. Well, right on the heels of our research here in the US, Italy's Ramazzini Institute concluded another large study, and their findings corroborated everything that we found. And they did theirs on the cell towers, the base stations. We did ours on the cell phones. And regardless of where microwave radiation is coming from, the World Health Organization has in 2011 classified this as a possible human carcinogen. Now that these more recent studies have been done, the WHO has reopened their investigation, and the scientists are calling for it to be, if not a probable human carcinogen, a straight out human carcinogen. So we have the science now on the cancers and the DNA damage. And as we know, DNA is our roadmap to grow a proper anything from a human to a plant to a pollinator to a biome. And this radio frequency radiation disrupts all of that. When I started reading the infertility studies, that was the day that I found my voice. They've taken male human sperm and exposed it to a laptop with the antennas radiating, and it damaged the DNA. It slowed the motility of the sperm, and it caused far fewer sperm to be viable or programmed cell death or apoptosis in just 4 hours of exposure to the antennas in a laptop. And my oldest daughter at that point in time had just gone up to college with her MacBook. And my youngest had just gone into high school, and we had given her a laptop for Christmas. And where were both of my girls using this technology, but right on top of their reproductive organs? So that was where things started clicking in my mind. And I went, holy moly, nobody knows this. We gotta tell people. So it was the infertility studies that got me to pluck up the courage to try and start doing something about this. And then, my goodness, you guys, even before the pandemic, we were at epidemic levels of anxiety and depression. And we were seeing suicidal ideation among children, let alone adults, like we have never seen before. It is clearly documented in the science that this constant pulsation of microwave radiation is a neurotoxin. So Dr. Hugh Taylor runs the OBGYN program at Yale Medical School. He has done some of the rodent studies, and he has seen that when you radiate the pregnant mice, the pups come out bouncing off the walls of the cage, much like a child with attention deficit or deficit hyperactivity disorder. And then Dr. Martha Herbert heads up and founded the Autism Lab at Massachusetts General Council. She's a Harvard pediatric neurologist, and she sees huge connections between what we know scientifically happens with microwave radiation exposure and what is happening to the families in her care. Dr. Martin Pall recently put out a review paper that talks about Alzheimer's disease, and where, like cancers, it would take decades to surface, but it was always forming. And then we would see cancers and Alzheimer's in our 70s or 80s. Now we're seeing Alzheimer's in 60s, 50-year-olds, 40-year-olds, 30-year-olds, and in rare cases, even 20-year-olds are getting diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So, you know, we have the facts, we have the science. What we need is public education and public policy for protections. So it's always comforting when mainstream groups figure out that wireless radiation needs to be a priority. And the Environmental Working Group is an organization like that I first discovered as a mom when they put out their pesticide fact sheets. So they had something that was a catchy phrase. It was the Clean 15 and the Dirty Dozen. Every year they put out these two lists of what produce you can buy that's grown conventionally that doesn't have too many chemicals that are going to be ingested by you, and which ones on the Dirty Dozen that you should probably really think about getting organic if you can. So I always had great regard for the Environmental Working Group, and I'm just over the moon that they have now gotten funding to have resources to work on the wireless issue. And they have come out with some amazing, very easily read fact sheets. This one is protecting kids from wireless radiation in schools and at home. And they also did one on the nervous system and microwave radiation. So children are not just little adults. They are especially vulnerable to any environmental exposures. And what the science shows us, this is a modeling done by Dr. Om Gandhi and his colleagues. These models up here are heads tilted sideways, where the yellow is the ear, where you would put a phone up to the head. On your fully formed adult skull, it's going to penetrate into your brain like a third of the way into your brain. On a 10-year-old, because their skulls are thinner, child's brains have a higher water content, that, you know, the radiation does a lot more with a higher water content. It's transmitting through a 10-year-old's brain about 3/4 of the way through the skull. And look at a 5-year-old's brain, how much radiation it's almost consuming the entire brain. So these aren't toys. We should never, ever give a child a device that's in active mode. And we'll teach you in a little bit how to get away from the wireless signals and still have excellent connectivity. So when we look at the short-term effects, it's important to recognize that the Americans with Disabilities Act since 2002 has had information out on their website about electromagnetic sensitivities and accommodations that we should be asking for at work and in other sensitive spaces. So we'll go through a list of common symptoms. And the good news is that so often people come back and say, you know, I didn't want to know about this. I didn't want to believe it. But oh my gosh, I recognized a lot of these symptoms and I took a chance and I turned it off. And I slept through the night for the first time in ages, or my children's behavior issues calmed way down. So for a lot of years, the industry got away with saying, oh, there's no mechanism of harm identified in the science, so let's just keep doing what we're doing. But now we know of many different mechanisms. We know about the cancers. We know about the infertility and what it's doing to the sperm and to a woman's reproductive system. With the insomnia, what the science is showing us is that because we are beings of light, which means we are regulated 24 hours a day through the light and dark cycles of our circadian rhythm. So all throughout that 24-hour cycle, different organs in our body are doing different resets all the time. In the wee hours of darkness, the pineal gland in the brain is meant to release melatonin. Melatonin then goes in and does a couple of really important things. One, it regulates our sleep. Two, it helps to cleanse the body through the blood of the toxins that are disposed of through everyday cell repair and regeneration. So if the brain thinks the lights are on because this man-made invisible light energy form of microwave radiation is pulsing, 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 the brain thinks the lights are on. Many times it won't properly release that melatonin to go in and regulate our sleep and our body's cleanup and repair mechanisms. Headaches, stabbing, searing headaches, migraines, nosebleeds, ear bleeds, Another set of scientific studies teaches us something called the rouleau effect. And in my little brain, that sounds a lot like those candies I used to love to eat before I had to quit eating so much junk food. Rolos, remember those stacked up caramels, chocolate caramels? Well, our red blood cells are meant to be free floating so that they can bring oxygen to all of our systems and organs and keep us humming along quite nicely. What the science is showing is that this rouleau effect is causing our red blood cells to magnetize and glom together in a chain, and they can't then go where they need to go to bring oxygen to all of our systems. So oxidative stress is another mechanism of harm, and it's a big one, because when you talk to your doctor about oxidative stress, they will tell you that that is the precursor for most chronic illnesses. And as Dr. Cindy Russell, who founded Physicians for Safe Technology, puts it, it's like we're rusting ourselves from the inside out when we're exposed to microwave radiation. Chronic fatigue, pain from unidentified sources, skin abnormalities, heating, flushing, tingling, burning. A lot of people talk about the hot ear when they put their cell phone up to their head. My tell is if I'm holding a radiating device, my pinky finger starts to tingle. And, so we know that it's affecting the blood in my hand, but we also have learned through the science that our skin has little antennas in the surface that help us to regulate ourselves in our environment. And this constant bombardment of microwave radiation can cause these skin abnormalities. Heartbeats, depending on your body's proclivity, might be too fast or it might be too slow. You might have palpitations. It might feel like somebody's sitting on your chest. And cognitive impairment, as we've discussed, this is a neurotoxin. It was heartbreaking at the EMF medical conferences to hear the physicians say, and the scientists say, that we can expect more of these outbursts in society like we've seen with these mass shootings if we continue to radiate the public, because this is biologically changing the gray matter and the white matter of the brain, not only in the learning areas, but in the behavior control areas as well. So we got to do something, you guys. Anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, and what the science is showing us is another mechanism of harm is we have membranes built into our bodies to protect sensitive areas. And one of them is the blood-brain barrier. So what the science is showing is this pulsation of microwave radiation is permeating or opening up that blood-brain barrier. So where our blood would be escorting toxins out, it can now take a turn directly into the brain. And we can be getting not only microwave directly to the brain, but now the toxins are getting in there like we have never seen before. So it helps us to understand why we have escalating rates of anxiety, depression, ADD, ADHD, autism, Alzheimer's, when we pollute the environment of the brain. So it's not just you and I, it's every biological cell on the planet, including our disappearing pollinators who are going down by the species, by the dozens these days. The birds, all of these guys have their own built-in navigation systems that are meant to be in sync with that Earth's natural electromagnetic field. And here we, smart humans, we put this giant and growing layer of electropollution, electrosmog. And so now they're having a hard time getting back through their own navigation systems to their hives and their nests. And, we're doing a big disservice to our other species. And then for those who are tuning into climate change, Greenpeace did a report in 2012 before we had any of this 5G or this whole added layer of electropollution. They said back then, if the cloud were a country, it would be the 5th largest consumer of energy in the world. But the industry only tells us the benefits. So we don't even think that, everything that goes into these devices has a cost. Mineral extractions down in the Congo and elsewhere, the human atrocities that go in to get many different minerals to go in every single one of our devices. If we understood the facts, we would never just toss aside a perfectly good device because the market has brought a new shiny object for us. Data warehouses, networks, and our personal devices consume this energy day in and day out unless we know to choose differently, to simply hardwire our technology, get everything through a wired connection. And streaming, for example, consumes huge amounts of energy. So don't sit there on an active device streaming, download it, put your device in airplane mode, and once it's on your device, it's there to enjoy without consuming energy and without radiating you. Every time we send and receive, even a cute little emoji, it's using energy somewhere, charging, recharging our devices every single day. We can do better once we know better, okay? But why don't we know? That was one of my missing puzzle pieces. So I kept thinking, if little me can just look at the science and use common sense and go, holy smokes, we are in big trouble here. Surely somebody's got to have our backs on this, right? And then in 2015, a couple of years after I got on this journey, Harvard Law School Center for Ethics came up with this amazing report, 59 pages, it's free and online, that talks about how many of our agencies, including the Federal Communications Commission, are captured by industry. They're supposed to be protecting us, and instead they're protecting the priorities of these industries. And I love the graphic that they chose for the cover of their report, which is this revolving door, and that's what we've had up at our federal agencies for years. So that was my missing puzzle piece. I'm like, oh, there is nobody who's got our backs at the federal agencies. And ProPublica did an article this past November that, brings it up to date, how the FCC is protecting the industry, not us. So remember that $30 million study that our own National Toxicology Program did? That was commissioned 2 decades ago by the Food and Drug Administration. And there were different people at the helm back then. Those guys are long since retired or dead. And today, the gentleman who's in charge of the radiation emissions at the FDA is Dr. Jeffrey Shuren, who has no expertise in this area. He has nobody on his staff with expertise in this area. When that NTP study concluded clear evidence of cancerous tumors and DNA damage, it was his responsibility to translate that into public policy, but he didn't. Instead, he went over to the FCC and said, oh, we don't really believe that. You just keep doing what you're doing. So the FCC wrote it up formally and put their determination that they don't have to update their public radiation exposure limits because the FDA said they didn't have to. When that determination hits something called the Federal Register, then the lawsuits could begin, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. With Dr. Shuren, when you go look at his background, you quickly discover that he's married to a woman who's a partner in a law firm that represents wireless clients. So he should have been nowhere near any of that National Toxicology Program work. So we've kind of got corruption at many different levels at our federal agencies. And sadly, it goes all the way to the top at the World Health Organization. They have reopened their investigation, but if you just do a quick cursory search and look for the World Health Organization on wireless radiation, the first things you'll find are old things saying, oh, it's kind of inconclusive, whatever. You really have to know to dig or to go to this link to see that back in 2011, they determined this was a group 2B human carcinogen, possible human carcinogen. What was missing at the time was the animal studies. Now that we have the animal studies, they have actually reopened their investigation to not only account for cancers, but for infertility, for the impact on children, for electromagnetic sensitivities, and for the impact on the environment. But it's hard to find because it's buried. And what we've come to learn is there are 2 groups at the World Health Organization that address electromagnetic radiation. One is the highly qualified scientists and doctors and advisors from around the world who have the credentials to weigh in on this issue. and the other is a very heavily industry-funded group. And we suspect, unfortunately, that this investigation that's open right now may get populated with the industry folks. So the corruption is just rampant, and it's up to you and I to use our voices at the local level to start making changes. So that's all the bad news, you guys. Let's now focus on what we can do. So in your home or your office, there's a router modem that gets hooked up from the connection, the cable or the fiber optics that comes in off the street. When you look at that, you'll see that it has Ethernet ports in it. All you have to do is get a big long Ethernet cable and run it to wherever you use most of your technology in your space. If you're going to do it, get a shielded Ethernet cable. There's other man-made forms of harmful energies just on our electrical wires that are buried in the walls. In commercial construction, those are shielded, and that just means it's got a foil liner that blocks those electric and magnetic fields from straying into your living area. Unfortunately, the building code doesn't require shielded cables for residential buildings. So if you're going to buy an Ethernet cable, pay a couple extra bucks if you can afford it, and get a shielded Ethernet cable that will keep you safe from that other low-level man-made form of energy that creates dirty electricity. So by now, most people have more than one device, maybe a laptop, maybe a phone, maybe multiple ones inside of a home, maybe tablets, or whatever you use your wireless for. Just get a little Ethernet switch. Think of it as an extension box for electronics. And each one of these little holes has its own internet address connected to it. So it's also not only healthier, but it will remove the competition in your home for bandwidth because you'll each have a really good direct connection. And you get incredibly fast speeds when you're wired. And the signal is more reliable, your data is more protected, your security is more protected. And as we said, it consumes so much less energy than all the wireless systems. So some of your devices may have a direct Ethernet port on it. You know, a laptop might still have that on it, but the tablets, the cell phones, and other devices, you might just need to invest in a little adapter. And folks, most of this is not going to break the bank. It may cost you about $100 to hardwire your equipment and then just plug it in. So for example, with the iPhone, you know, you would plug one end into your router, you run the Ethernet cable to wherever you're using your technology. And who knew, but here's this little adapter that I paid like 30 bucks for that plugs into the phone. And then you just go into the settings and you turn off every one of those antennas, the cellular, the data, the Bluetooth, the Wi-Fi, the locator, the hotspot. And for anybody who didn't know any better and upgraded to a 5G phone, go in and check to see what you've got for antennas in there because they're putting a bunch more in for that, and just turn everything off. And then you can do anything you do on the internet safely without radiating yourself. Working on a small screen is really bad for our eyes and our posture and stuff. So, you know, use these little devices sparingly and healthfully. And then you can just forward from your cell phone, your phone calls to a landline. And a lot of people say, yeah, but I gave up my landline. But go back and check with your provider, because I remember when, you know, they moved into our area, you would get the internet, the cable, and the phone service all bundled together. And if you decided to drop one of the services, the price was still kind of the same. So it might not be that much more to get your landline back, but talk to your internet service providers and see which one offers you the best deal. So I got this phone from Staples for like 30 bucks. I like it because it's got big buttons, it's got a display dial, it's got a good speakerphone. So if I'm here working on my computer and conducting a phone call and using my computer, I can do it, you know, with my hands on the computer. So there's solutions for everything. Same thing for the tablets and the laptops and your gaming systems. You know, just start thinking, start doing the gap analysis. Where are these exposures? And then once you have hardwired it, critically important to go in and turn off the radiating antennas, because just plugging it in won't automatically disable that. We should be asking our engineers to make that a feature, but right now we're not quite there yet. And with the router, I simply called up Verizon at the time and said, I'm choosing hardwired technology, but that triple play box that you guys put in my home is still radiating off the charts. How do I make that stop? They said, oh, that's easy. Sit down at your computer. And I went, really? And they said, yeah. So they talked me into how to get into my account. They showed me where the wireless settings were. And I just went in, and there was a 2.4 gigahertz antenna and a 5 gigahertz antenna. And I just went off, apply. And I got a message like, you're cutting everyone's Wi-Fi off. And I went, yeah, thank you. And then I let it dissipate. And then I measured a few minutes later, and I was back into the green zone on my meter. So hardwire, turn off the antennas. And it's so critically important to measure, right? Because with 5G and the Internet of Things, they are looking to put antennas, multiple antennas, in just about everything we buy these days, because they want to harvest your data and sell it to somebody who would be interested in knowing what you're doing so they can sell you product. Or some people are concerned about more nefarious reasons for getting a hold of your data, but measuring with a device is critically important. And again, see if you can get one for your community, and then everybody can borrow it through your public library. Okay. So we've talked about what we can do with our own devices. There are a few other exposures that you want to start thinking about that you may or may not have direct control over, but we can change some of that through public policy changes. So the first one is utility smart meters. It's these kind of things that are mounted on our homes, our offices, our schools, that gather how much usage we've had for electrical, gas, water, propane services, and then they bill us. But if your meter now has an FCC ID number on it, that means it has a radio frequency radiation transmitter in it. The industry will tell you that these digital meters only pulse a couple seconds a day, but they don't. I was getting ready to testify before the Massachusetts Department of Public Utilities, and I wanted to get some data. So I sat down on the floor in my dining room, where we've got 2 electric meters mounted on the other side of the wall, one for regular electric and one for our solar system. And I sat there and I measured, and when I did the math, it had added up to 17,000 pulsations of microwave radiation directly into my home. I mean, I was inside the house and it was picking up those frequencies. So don't believe what the industry tells you. Always go to the facts. Another danger of these is that I mentioned that radio frequency likes metal. And so that pulsation can hop onto the wiring of the house and the pipes in the house and literally turn your house into a giant radio frequency antenna. There's many, many recorded reports of fires and explosions if these devices aren't properly grounded, or if there's a power surge. And then, as I mentioned, the data harvest and privacy issues. And at the medical conference, the doctors were telling us that this is one of the leading causes of sudden onset microwave sickness when these smart meters go on a home and it's near where people spend time, like a bedroom, or a bank of them get installed on somebody's kitchen, and then it's just a whomping dose of all this radiation coming throughout your entire living space. And this is a big environmental justice issue. Radiation in general, we see that they'll come put the cell towers and stuff in, and also these smart meters, and sometimes they'll come into a environmental justice community where people are working 2 or 3 jobs just to keep a roof over their head or put food on the table. Lower income, impoverished communities, racial minorities. And these industries come in and peddle their toxic products, banking that nobody here is going to be smart enough to know to question this. And they did that in Worcester, Massachusetts. They rolled out their smart grid pilot program, which then ran way over budget. The Attorney General's office got engaged for the cost overruns. And we've been raising the red flag on the biological harm that people are currently experiencing from these smart meters. And Jeremy Johnson is an engineer originally from Silicon Valley. His wife is a medical doctor, and they both got really sick really fast, and nothing in her medical training could help her to figure out what the heck was going on. Well, it turned out it was a bank of smart meters that went in on their condo. So Jeremy has done this TEDx talk, which is a really useful resource because our engineers and physicists and technologists have only been taught you have to have heat to have harm, and that's incorrect. So having hearing from one of your peers is often a nice way to open this conversation. So Jeremy now does consulting with people. You can book an online consulting session with him. And then more recently, Dr. Alexia McKnight just released a TED Talk that she did. And she, ironically, is a veterinary radiologist. So she's fully trained in radiology. And she had no idea why her health crashed to the point where she would be at a traffic signal and she couldn't remember if green meant stop or go. And she was having all these neurological issues, sleep issues, the whole personality thing, and anxiety and heart problems. And then something malfunctioned and they had to come remove the smart meter from her home. And within a week or two, all of her symptoms started getting better. And then they came back and they put a smart meter back on her home, and then she started crashing again. And that's how she figured out it was a smart meter. So she and I partnered and went into her schools. They were inviting experts to come in for their health and wellness professional development day. So Dr. McKnight and I actually got to present 4 times in a school district, and we have the video included here later too, if anybody wants to share that with their school. So our own devices, the smart meters, and now the cell towers. It's critically important to look at the non-industry funded science. And I got in way over my head when I was looking at all the research. So being a tech writer, I just created a very simple research repository called Understanding EMFs, because I didn't understand what these electromagnetic fields were. And I realized I couldn't remember where I had seen important studies. So I just started putting together a list of topics and then a page. This is my cell tower page. And here it's telling us, this is the danger. We should never have a base station, a cell tower within 500 meters, which is 1,640 feet. There's a death curve that starts coming down, and a neurotoxicity and insomnia and all that good stuff starts coming down at 1,640 feet away from a cell tower. It doesn't actually catch up to the regular population statistics of death and neurotoxicity until double that. So 500 meters is the least of where we should begin. So the science is all here. And then there's an online resource here in the US called antennasearch.com, where you can type in any address and it will give you a 3-mile radius and show you where the cell towers are, as well as where the antennas are mounted. So I put in our address for the Massachusetts State House here in Boston, and within 3 miles, there are 1,520 cell towers. And there are over 4,500 of these giant radiating antennas in 3 miles. And every one of those things can pulse for miles. So the electropollution in our big cities, where the industry targets first, is just so unhealthy these days. And so this is one environmental justice community in one of the Boston neighborhoods in Hyde Park, and you can see where they have put all these antennas in right on top of these neighborhoods. So use these resources to see what's going on. And then in addition to the big macro cell antennas, industry is now pushing in this new layer for 5G or 5th generation technology. And they're calling them these small cells, right? Their spin is that we're going to have faster entertainment downloads. We're going to have smart cities and super highways, and, they glitz it up for us. And if you look as one of their new revenue streams, they are buying up the entertainment industry. So they're no dummies. They know the wheels are coming off the bus for wireless. So they're diversifying and buying up other industries. So it's not like 5G is just going to wipe out all the other big antennas we've got on. Those are the backbone to these smaller antennas that are showing up on street lights, on poles, on, wires and stuff being hung in the community. So it's a whole additional layer of microwaves. And all that's, your cell phone today uses 3G and 4G waves. Those are longer wavelengths, and they can penetrate in through a building to get to your device indoors. All that's left to monetize are these dinky little millimeter waves. And they're small, and they're saying we're going to have such fast speeds, but they get blocked by objects like rain or snow or leaves and trees and bushes and stuff. So what their crazy solution is to add new cell towers every 2 to 12 houses inside our neighborhoods at the curb in our public access way, so that those signals can hop close range and not get disrupted. Cell towers in our neighborhoods, and we are seeing it happen all over the country and the world. And they're coming in and they're clear cutting trees to keep the signal clear, which for our environment and our communities is a horrible action. And the kicker is they never safety tested any of this. So at this congressional hearing in Washington, D.C. with the Commerce Committee, Connecticut Senator Richard Blumenthal spoke directly to 2 industry reps and said, so please share with us, how much money have you invested for independent science before bringing 5G to market? And these guys kind of hemmed and hawed, and then they ultimately said, well, we don't know of any studies. So Senator Blumenthal said, so as far as health and safety are concerned, we're flying blind here. And then Computer World and other people who track the industry say 5G is a bad joke. It's not even giving us the promised faster speeds. It's not any faster than the toxic 4G that we already had. But yet Verizon continued to boast that in January of last year, they brought 5G to 100 million people in our big cities. And this next bullet is not a popular topic, but it is fact, so I feel compelled to share it. There was a lot of buzz around the pandemic with 5G, and we're not saying that 5G caused the pandemic, but what the science is showing in this paper by doctors Beverly Rubik and Rob Brown is that there's evidence for a connection between COVID-19 and exposure to radio frequency from all sources, including 5G, and studies have been done to show that where 5G was up and running, like in Wuhan, China, there are higher incident rates of COVID cases and higher death rates. And I appreciated the way that Dr. Andrew Goldsworthy put it from the UK, is that one of the things the industry would prefer we don't think about is that our biological cells have a finite amount of energy in them that are pretty well calibrated to get us through our day and to do the cell repair and regeneration at night. So when we put a man-made environmental exposure like radio frequency pulsing at us all the time, that's a lot of repair that has to happen for our poor bodies to try and keep up, right? So now you've turned on 5G at close range, cell towers right in front of people's homes, and then you get a virus that comes through. Well, what has our body got left to work out that with? So as we layer on these environmental exposures, our bodies get weaker and weaker in their capability to do cell repair and get us back to homeostasis. So this is a really important paper there. Dr. Magda Havas, who was the co-chair of the EMF Medical Conference, she retired from Trent University up in Canada, where she taught electromagnetism for 25 years. She recognizes that very few of our governments do any kind of monitoring of this cumulative exposure, not just from the one device that they use to set our federal guidelines with, but all this electrosmog hitting us all at once. And so she has established this global EMF monitoring project, which she nicknamed her BRAG project, like, can you brag about your town and the levels? So BRAG stands for B for black, R for red, A for amber, and G for green. And she uses this key here based on the science that at one point said, you know, if we could get even outdoors when you're moving around to 1,000 or less of these microwatts, we want to be at 10 or less indoors. And if you have an indoor space where you can be safe, maybe even if the outdoors was like at 1,000 and you can clean up at home, then maybe we'd do all right. And then amber gets up to 10,000, red gets up to 100,000, and blackout goes over 100,000. So she is inviting the public to serve as citizen scientists. And in order to have a control for the science, you need to use the same radio frequency detection meter. And it's this one that was recommended at the medical conference, the Safe and Sound Pro 2. So for anybody who would like to participate and go out and use her protocol for an hour or two in your community, you walk down your main street, you go to 5 consecutive intersections, and you do your waving around with the meter, and you write it down on a clipboard, bring a friend with you because it's fun to do with 2 people, or bring somebody from your town so they can see what's going on. But then you just enter your data into her database, and she has this map where you can see what different communities are like. So maybe you want to brag to your town, look how good we are. Keep doing it. Let's keep our bylaws strong. Or maybe you can say, holy moly, man, we're in deep, deep trouble here. Or if you're electromagnetically ill or don't want to become ill, maybe you can use her data to look into communities where you might stand a chance of being able to go outside and not getting terribly walloped. So feel free to reach out to the globalemf.net website. And if you are going to participate, let them know, and they may be able to offer you a pretty substantial discount, maybe up to 25% off of this $400 meter. So reach out to them, let them know you want to play with their study, and they will offer you that discount. Okay, so just to give you an idea, again, we want to be under 1,000 outdoors. One of our New Hampshire for Safe Technology members went out and measured at her local fire station, and it was in the green zone there. Keene, New Hampshire, getting dangerous. Nashua, New Hampshire, Concord, Stratham, they wound up putting a giant cell tower right in the center of their town there. And in the North End in Boston, a resident and I did the walkthrough, and we were getting readings as high as 613,000. And Hanover Street in the North End is where all the amazing Italian restaurants and bakeries are. But a lot of immigrants settled here, many decades ago, and there's a lot of people still living right above all these storefronts here. And so these cell towers are literally right outside their bedrooms. And they put these pretty wrought iron looking ones down the main drag. But when you get to the cross streets and you look over, you see these ugly gray monopoles stuck right outside people's bedrooms. So that's all the bad news. The good news, as Martin Luther King Jr. taught us, is that when we have important changes in society, it comes through 3 primary channels. The public learns and gets engaged, like we're hoping to empower you to do with this education forum. It goes through the courts, and the guilty are held accountable. And ultimately, public policy catches up, in this case, to the science. And so I'll spend just a few moments going through each one of the next slides, just to give you hope that there are amazing things happening, and then you can take it on your own time and drill through a lot of the links. But the FCC has been sued by the Environmental Health Trust, by Children's Health Defense, and a number of others who got combined into one lawsuit, because when that Federal Register decision was filed by the FCC that says, oh, we don't have to change our public exposure limits, they had a docket open for 6 years into which doctors and scientists and sick people and loved ones of the deceased sick people all put their testimonies in. And so when this lawsuit happened, the attorneys and the Environmental Health Trust and Children's Health Defense put together 27 binders of 11,000 pages of evidence in the public record. And the judges are reading through all this going, well, FCC attorneys, how did you determine that we can still radiate the public at these levels? And they went, oh, the FDA said we could. And they said, well, where's the FDA's homework? And nobody at our federal level has ever done the investigation of the science, of the independent peer-reviewed science. So we have a huge regulatory gap there. And so the courts said to the FCC, apparently the courts don't like to tell federal agencies what to do, but they remanded it back to the FCC to account for the biological impact on the environment, on children, on fertility, and the long-term impact, because the regulations that the FCC use only go for a 6-minute or a 30-minute exposure with something that has a space and it's not even used the way that we use this technology today. So in August of 2021, actually Friday the 13th of August 2021, the FCC got told by the courts, you need to bring this in line with the science. And it's been nearly 2 years and the FCC has done not one thing. So Children's Health Defense just filed another petition with the court saying we need to get them off the stick and get this addressed. So lots of other lawsuits and a petition that you can sign to claim imminent hazard and, you know, other inroads that people are making. I mentioned that in Pittsfield, Verizon turned that cell tower on top of this neighborhood, and the neighbors got so sick they had to abandon their homes. For the first time in the United States, their city council ordered their Board of Health to investigate, and they did. And after 15 months, their Board of Health wrote an emergency order to come to the table, Verizon, and let's figure this out. And Verizon would not come to the table. Instead, they went and got an injunction against the Pittsfield Board of Health to say, we don't think you have a legal leg to stand on. But the Board of Health had already spoken with the state attorneys, and it looks like the FCC only controls the siting of a cell tower. Once it gets turned on, that goes into the Board of Health jurisdiction. If there are nuisances or illnesses happening in the community, the Board of Health trumps the FCC. So they were pretty confident that that's what it would come to if they had to go to court on this. But the mayor and some of the city council members and the city solicitor all look to have conflicts of interest with the industry, and they would not give their own Board of Health, after ordering them to investigate, they wouldn't give them the nominal funds needed to take this to court. So now the citizens are suing the town of Pittsfield, and they just had a court hearing this past week, and we're waiting for the judge to see if they will remove that injunction so the Board of Health can then get what they need to execute and get those families back into their homes. So there are so many amazing court cases happening all over the country that you are welcome to look at more closely. In the policy arena, as Deb mentioned, New Hampshire, even though we have had bills for 10 years in Massachusetts, New Hampshire actually took action. In 7 months, they got a really good bill with very pointed questions through the House, through the Senate, and under the governor's pen, and they formed a law to investigate why the insurance industry has those exclusions. They don't cover for damages. Lloyd's of London, Swiss Re, AM Best, they have long since recognized that this is a world-leading risk. Why does that fine print that we looked through say to keep it away from the body? Why is the FCC ignoring all these studies? And why do they only talk to the thermal effects when the harm is happening at the non-thermal levels? And why does our country allow 100 times more radiation than certain other countries? And why is nobody looking at all the cumulative effects that are hitting us simultaneously? So they did their work even during the pandemic. They spent a year bringing in world-leading experts, and they came out with this groundbreaking commission report that is probably the best document in our country today to share with your local municipalities and your schools. They document the conflicts of interest with the wireless industry and our federal agencies. They lay out a plan for migrating from where we are today to get to safe, hardwired fiber optics or high-speed cable to and through the premises, where we just simply hook up our own stuff with cables indoors. So that report came out in late 2020, which was too late to introduce legislation for 2021. But Dr. Kent Chamberlain, who was at the time the chair and professor of the Computer and Electrical Engineering Department at the University of New Hampshire, he's a career EMF engineer expert, and he thought this was going to be a slam dunk. Of course, Wi-Fi must be fine. When he started looking at the science and validating that these are really credible studies, he did a complete 180, and now Dr. Chamberlain is out there trying to engineer solutions and also to educate policymakers on the facts of wireless radiation. So lots of great resources. The first bill that they took on last year would implement that minimal setback of 500 meters and also come up with a registry of harm so people have a place to go to report where they're getting sick. So you can read all of that. Frank Clegg from Microsoft Canada sent in his testimony in which he states that wireless technology is no longer advanced technology. It's outlived its useful life. And it is no longer a viable main source of connectivity. We have enough infrastructure today to make a cell phone call in most places within reason. And that's all the law tells us we have to be able to do, is a phone call. The law has nothing to do with all these new services the industry keeps pushing with Wi-Fi and broadband and, you know, fast streaming and all of that. That's their money makers. That is not what the law says we have to do. So what we discovered too late last year is that there was turnover on this Science, Technology, and Energy Committee, and it wasn't the same group of people who put that bill into law in the first place to investigate. And so we got too late of a start to do the education that was required to make them fully comfortable to say, okay, we're going to put this new law into place. But to their credit, they did vote 15-3 that in 2023, there is something there and we need to look at introducing new legislation. So this year, they worked with Scott McAuliffe, who's the attorney who gave the oral arguments for the big lawsuit with the FCC. And he went in and looked and saw that, like in so many states, the industry got in and got the states to change their laws to make it easy for them to strip local control from our towns and put in this equipment kind of wherever they want to put it in. So Scott McAuliffe rewrote the law that they have on the books today, but you know, the industry got in their ear and they did not pass that law. So we're very disappointed in the House Committee on Science, Tech, and Energy. They kind of pulled a fast one in the end. It was really kind of sad to watch. So, but if we can get enough of the senators educated in the rest of this year, then Senator Denise Ricciardi, who served on that commission, she is willing to introduce new legislation, but we've got to do the legwork in advance. So to everybody who lives in New Hampshire, please reach out to us. We will come with you to a meeting with your senator. We will present the facts, and then Senator Ricciardi will introduce her new bill in January. So Maine has now introduced a bill. Representative Tracy Quint is a nurse, and she started hearing from her own adult children and from her constituents, and she started investigating and invited some of us in to help her with this bill. And so that bill is now in play to see what this impact is and learn how to protect the birds, the bees, the insects, and children. Connecticut has one on small cells and smart meters, and here in Massachusetts, we now have 6 bills this session that we can look at in more detail. We'll talk about these more in our monthly Massachusetts for Safe Technology meeting. We do that the 3rd Wednesday of every month at 12 o'clock Eastern, and we give updates on where we are with all of these bills. But, you know, these bills have all been around for a while for the schools to get a commission, protect the kids, get the choice to opt out of these smart meters as a first choice. They really need to be engineered so they're not toxic. And then Scott McAuliffe helped us to write a bill, or wrote us a bill, to recognize civil rights in public areas and in other areas that people go, so they can, within reason, ask for accommodations. And then we already have a registry in Massachusetts that allows our town health agents to look and say, okay, here's how many COVID cases we have, here's how many food poisoning cases we have, you know, and so on. It's time to recognize electromagnetic sensitivities, get that in the registry so doctors can report into that, and we can make better decisions when we have better data. And so the industry wheels into town and says, oh, you know, nobody cares about these cell towers. It's just the NIMBYs, or they're not in my backyards. You know, nobody else cares about this, which we know, of course, is not true. If you go to Americans for Responsible Technology, you can see there are over 150 groups all over the country who have been working on this, and you might find some groups in your area that you can partner up with, or they have a toolkit there to teach you how to start your own group. So lots of things that have happened in many towns that we just don't hear about in mainstream media, but there are many people making inroads all over our country. Okay. And towns themselves are taking action. Boston has filed petitions with the FCC. They joined a group of cities all over the country to sue the FCC. They didn't win, but every lawsuit builds off the next. And here in Burlington, Massachusetts, there was a new policy that they introduced a few years back that has become part of a model for the whole country to use. They said, you know, aesthetically, everything has to blend in with the environment because the law allows them to say that currently today. It also says that you have to be compliant with the Americans with Disabilities Act. So you can't just stick a pole in the middle of a sidewalk where a wheelchair couldn't get by. And what Burlington did for the first time is say, you can't just drop and run. If we approve your permits for these small cells, you have to come back every single year and recertify that that equipment is still lawful within our community with the exposures. And we as a town, we don't have that expertise. So you, Verizon or whomever, you have to pay to do that independent consult with an outside expert on every one of these small cells. And when they did that, Burlington, at their ratification meeting, when they adopted it, the Verizon attorney was there and said, well, our client doesn't wish to set a precedent for an annual recert or a fee, because mind you, they plan to put millions of these antennas everywhere. So our friends at Americans for Responsible Technology took that along with other best practices from around the country, and they have come up with a checklist and a sample ordinance in their toolkit that anybody can just go take it to their town and say, look, we know most of our town attorneys are good people, but they are not experts in telecom law. Here's some expertise available to you. And by the way, we probably should hire an expert attorney to come in as special counsel to make sure we get this right. And it's not going to break the bank. There are experts out there, for example, Robert Campanelli or Andrew Campanelli. He only charges like $8,500 for a town to have them review what's on the books currently in their town, what the state law is, what the federal law is, what the gaps are, and then to rewrite that language so the town can stand up in court, because the industry always threatens to sue. And the attorneys in town will be, gosh, do they really sue? And then they'll go and look and say, oh my gosh, look at all these towns they've sued. What they don't see when they look at that record is all the towns that beefed up their local zoning bylaws. And every time the industry threatened to sue, it never went anywhere because they had their bylaws right. So there are so many resources. Towns are adopting good bylaws, so feel free to bring this to your town and see what we can do. And then it's so refreshing when you see something like a health board or a, city council or somebody like that pay attention to this issue like they did in Easton, Connecticut. There was a doctor that served on their board, and they put a moratorium and said, until the science is proven safe, we don't want any small cells in our town. Hawaii County put up a resolution that they didn't want any small cells in their community. So this is happening all over the world. We just don't hear about it. And then a quick few words on our schools. So the New York Times did a 3-part expose on what Silicon Valley executives are doing with their children, and they're banning screens. They're sending their kids to schools with not wireless, not hardwired, but no technology, because they know that a child's brain develops best and their social skills develop best with meaningful interactions with their families, with their trusted adults at school, with their peers, and with the natural environment. And these articles from the New York Times that say that Silicon Valley executives are going so far as to having their nannies sign contracts that there will be no screens around their children. And we're so grateful. The same folks who did the Americans for Responsible Technologies program have also come out with a Tech Safe Schools program. So they have a toolkit here too. You can contact them, provide them with the contacts in your school district, and they will send out a whole packet to your school administrators. And then you can take that and go in. Don't go it alone. Get other parents around you, educated first, or grandparents. They have a lot more time sometimes than the parents do. Don't go it alone. That was my hard lesson learned, and you are easily swept under the rug. But once you have a group of well-informed, calm, polite citizens showing up, then you've got leverage. So use this toolkit at Safe Tech or Tech Safe Schools. And experts have worked with the Massachusetts Breast Cancer Coalition, and they have come up with curriculum for kindergarten through grade 12 schools at each grade level for the students and the teachers. And this is that professional development webinar that Dr. Lexi McKnight and I did. So we've got amazing resources. And then again, we can literally train your entire school district in a half an hour online with our schools and families course. And if there's a good corporate citizen who's socially responsible, if they license this course to train their own employees, we will empower them to donate the licensing for free to a local school. So we can create a win-win with safeguarding the students. Their families will start learning about this, staff, the faculty, and the corporate sponsors. So we're just trying to bring solutions to everything here. And then our friends at the Environmental Health Trust, they've got a whole web page full of handouts and posters and postcards that you can just send to the printer or print out yourself to use to open up these important conversations. So Maryland, these guys have done incredible work with Maryland, and they are the first public health agency at the state level to recommend hardwiring our schools, and they just came out with a fact sheet recently. The U.S. Collaborative for High Performance Schools, which does green certification, they have a unit on low EMF best practices, not only from the radiation, but from the dirty electricity, from improper wiring. So many excellent resources for you and everybody that you come in contact with. Okay. And then again, start where you are. What professional organizations do you belong to? What about your own healthcare team? We have resources here. Again, that medical conference is only available to enroll until the 15th of June with completion by July 1, and the months are flying off the calendar. So please, there's a letter at Massachusetts for Safe Technology on our resources page that you can simply print out and hand right over to your doctors, your nurses, your first responders. And then Dr. Cindy Russell, Dr. Joel Moskowitz, and others have a whole website just for healthcare practitioners to come learn from credible resources. Same thing for our engineers, our physicists, our technologists. Excellent, excellent resources here for you to share. Okay. And then for your own home and workspaces, a lot of people are do-it-yourselfers, a lot of people aren't. So to go, play with the wires at home is not a big deal for some. For others, they're like, whoa, I'm overwhelmed. Who would know there's a whole profession called building biologists that are highly trained. Many of them do the extended training for electromagnetic radiation, but they also train for mold, for VOCs, for formaldehyde, all these indoor pollutants from the air and the water. You can hire them to come in and assess your space, and then they'll give you a report. And from there, you can decide what you want to do for your next steps. This film, Generation Zapped, is amazing. 74 minutes. It will teach you in a non-threatening way what the risks are. This is a great next step to sit down with your loved ones or your colleagues and do a screening. I can be brought in to do a presentation as a follow-on to say what's happened since that film was released in 2018. But it's excellent. It's a really good way. And now, with our libraries using streaming services, if they have a Canopy with a K, K-A-N-O-P-Y, they have a Canopy or a Hoopla subscription, you can watch it for free through your library. It's part of Amazon Prime right now, or you can just download it online for a few dollars. Bert Wolf on PBS, Camilla Reese helped him to do these 2 episodes, half hour each. Easy peasy way to help others learn about this. And again, here's that toolkit from Americans for Responsible Technology that has everything you need to open this conversation and feel empowered to do so. And again, it's not just you and I, it's our kids, children around us. They watch everything we do, and it's monkey see, monkey do. So if we've got bad screen time habits, we're teaching that as an acceptable behavior for our kids. So it's important to just take stock, set limits for yourself and your children, and model that good behavior. I love this little poster called 50 Ways to Take a Break, because it reminds us of all the cool things we used to do before we fell down the rabbit hole with our screens. Go dance, go, take a lesson, go play music, go outside and play, go for a walk, go for a hike. I'm fortunate to collaborate with Dr. Carrie Crofton up in Canada, who has a less screen, more green program. And I'll see if I can add a bullet for that here. But it's really reminding us of the healing power of being back out in nature. So this is just a good way. Well, if I do set my phone down, now what do I do? This will remind you what we used to do. And Dr. Laura Conover came up with a book. Poor thing, she released it just as the pandemic hit. Dr. Stephen Sinatra and Clint Ober had done an earlier book called Grounding or Earthing. And it talks about how we're all meant to be connected to the earth's, healing energy. And it showed all the science and stuff. And I read it and it made sense, but I'm like, I live in the Northeast. I can't be walking around barefoot for 6 months of the year. So what do I do? Well, Dr. Conover came out with this book called The Earth Prescription, Discovering the Healing Power of Nature with Grounding Practices for Every Season. So for each season, she's got a dozen or more ways to ground naturally without having to take your shoes off. So that's a cool book. So when you start the conversation with your municipal level, remember, we want to get to as low as reasonably achievable. And I have a page for municipal leaders with links off to other great resources like this free online book out of a policy group in DC that helps us to differentiate the industry's priorities, which is more money, more equipment, more cell phones everywhere, not really healthy for us, differentiate against their priorities and what our town should really be reinvesting in, which is landlines and networks that don't emit microwave radiation at close range. So all these great resources, and it's critically important always to measure what is the exposure and measure against biological effects, not these, bogus limits that the FCC gives us. So we know what those measurements are and we can help. So next steps, there is, we can't kid ourselves. There is no safe level of man-made microwave radiation. So Dr. Linda Birnbaum recently retired as the head of the National Institutes of Environmental Health Sciences. And in a talk that she gave, she indicated that, yes, we have captured agencies, but we still have some really good people at the federal level, and we need to help empower them to do their jobs. So she said she sees it's going to take the court actions, but also a push up from the local and state level to empower the good guys at the federal level. So that starts with you and I. We need to educate the public. You can click here to see what our upcoming sessions are. We do 2 a month, so we're always here to help give you credible information. And then we can be brought in to do forums for your town for a regional forum. And here are some examples that you can take a peek at if you want to do that. And mercy, we have got to train our schools, because every day those kids are sitting there getting radiated for 7 or 8 hours a day. And again, start where you are. What professional associations do you belong to? Most are always looking for new speaking ideas, and I am in my happy place when I'm educating people. So I would be more than honored to speak to people about coming in and giving a talk. And I can also help you line up other professionals like doctors or scientists or engineers if those credentials are better suited. So we don't care who does it. We just want the opportunity to educate. All right, so all of our towns should be forming townwide tech safety committees. Now that technology is here, We need to be in charge of it, not let it continue to push us around. Talk to our towns, make sure that we always have an opt out of those smart meters or those digital meters, and then ultimately transition to just hardwiring all of our public utilities and, the cell towers. So every town should be looking at their wireless communication facility bylaws. And as I said, Americans for Responsible Technology, they've got a checklist. Sit down with your town planner and the attorney and say, here's where we are, what are the gaps, and they'll help us to learn how to get to where we need to be through their toolkit. And again, don't be shy about reaching out to a professional who does this day in and day out, like Andrew Campanelli. He used to work for industry, figured out the harm that they were pushing out there, and he switched teams, and now he helps municipalities and individuals fight these battles and rewrite their zoning codes. So I think he's on vacation for the next week or two, but you could certainly put a call in. So for today, look at what you're in, see where your exposures are, start with baby steps. We know this is overwhelming, but it doesn't have to be. You're halfway there now. I used to tell my kids if something upset them, go scream into a pillow, get it physiologically out of your system like birds do. They shake it off when they've been upset, and then come back to the table. Now that you're halfway there and let us help you figure out how to get there. So first level, create a sleep sanctuary, because if you don't protect your sleep, your body can't protect you. Then transition over to hardwiring, to Ethernet cables and adapters. Choose airplane mode as often as you can. It's kind of freeing not to be at everybody's beck and call. Some people who have to have a cell phone for work will choose to keep it in airplane mode and then set an alarm, because everything on your device, your alarm, your clocks, your music, your camera, whatever's on there is yours to use and enjoy without radiating yourself. So set an alarm to go off as frequently as you need to check in, and then set it away from your body, go into active mode, upload, download your messaging, put it right back in airplane mode, then pick it up again and compose your responses, and then just set it away from you, send your responses, and then go right back into airplane mode. It's a little bit of a hassle, but it's a heck of a lot safer. And then our friends at the Environmental Health Trust have, as I mentioned, all these really cool resources that they have ready, just sitting there for you guys to print out. So, thank you. Thank you for joining us. You can click here to go to the New Hampshire for Safe Technology Facebook page, or you can write to them directly. This link will get you to Massachusetts for Safe Technology. We've taken the time and the expense to build out this website that our friends in New Hampshire just simply refer people over to, so we don't have to reinvent the wheel. So feel free to go there, or you can email me directly here at safetech@gmail.com. So I will stop sharing and we will go ahead and open it up. Deb, thank you for staying with us. And if you have people who have questions that we can start to field now, we've got about 15 minutes left.
Yeah, the first question was Karen. Karen, if you want to unmute, you could ask your question, or I can read your question from the chat.
Oh, I'm not really sure. I was asking and answering a lot of questions.
If you're using a particular router for Verizon.
Oh, right, Cece. You had mentioned that you had a router that you use for Verizon.
Yeah, and
my daughter has one, and I think it's a combined white one, right? It had everything connected, the router and the modem probably together. And we went through Verizon, and she said, "Oh yeah, it's all disconnected." But when we put the meter there, he said, "No, it's still not. It's still signal." So I don't know if there are just other ones that we could.
Well, that is such a great question. And we had that same experience. And we discovered that sometimes they will do updates overnight that might turn those antennas back on. And my husband saw a better deal with Comcast. So he called them up and said, we'd like to take advantage of your better deal, but my wife's going to want to be sure that there's no radio frequency in our home when you're done doing the installation of the new boxes around our house. So they said, "Oh yeah, no problem." So the tech comes and he does the installation and spends half a day here getting it all hooked up. And I said, okay, humor me. And I go down to our utility closet and I measure and it's off the charts red. And I said, okay, so you got the 2.4 and the 5 gigahertz antennas off, right? And he said, yeah. And I said, and somebody tipped me off that Comcast is putting public hotspots on the routers in our homes and drawing our electricity. So you can throw signal out to the curb to service your customers. And he said, yeah, I did. I turned off the 2.4 and the 5 gigahertz hotspot. So that's 4 antennas. And I said, so what's going on? He said, I don't know. So he calls the help desk. They don't know. He calls the supervisor. The supervisor doesn't know. And he said, well, I'm going to come back tomorrow with my supervisor. And I had remembered when I was at that first EMF medical conference, I was sitting down with a couple of the engineers and I was on the periphery of their conversation where they were saying there was a 5th antenna in there. So I reached out to Peter that night and I said, Peter, what was that other antenna? And he said, oh, it came equipped with a home security system, a wireless antenna for wireless security. And whether you want that service or not, that radiating antenna was on. So I talked to my husband. I said, you know what? I don't really have an appetite to take a chance that these things are going to start coming back on during updates. So Steve just ran out to the tech store, Best Buy or whatever, and bought our own router. And it kind of pays for itself because on your internet service provider bill, you're getting charged $10 a month or so to rent their equipment. So after a couple of years, buying your own pays for itself. So the next morning when the tech came back with his supervisor, they're still, stumped. They don't know why that thing is still radiating. And I said, well, I contacted somebody and they said, you have to go to a tier 2 tech support person to get you to an engineer that will then turn it off from their end. And I said, we really don't want to risk exposing our family to these frequencies. As a show of good faith, will you just install this one for me? And so they did. They were really nice. And we got to teach them something that day. So you're right that you actually have to measure. And then you got to keep digging to see what those other antennas are.
So you got another router, but the modem is different than a router, right? So you have the modem.
Yeah, I think we got a combo thing.
Right?
Yeah, I'm not a techie in that regard. So you need to talk to, somebody at the tech store and make sure that you wind up with the right equipment. But yeah, sometimes.
So maybe just talking to that tech person, the 2-tier tech person, they may be able to,
Yeah.
since you've already enlightened them. So maybe
Well, that was some years ago. Who knows?
Right. I know. Oh
Okay. Well, Karen, thank you so much for joining us. Deb, additional questions?
Yeah, so Janet had a question about Faraday cages and shielding. Do you want to ask your question, Janet?
Thanks. Hi, Cece. I had the same kind of experience with Comcast, and they kept kicking it upstairs to even tertiary level tech who finally did turn it all off and I could measure. But I'm going to check again because who knows? You're right. Maybe it came back on. The place I'm moving to for senior living. First of all, I want to know if anybody's in the Londonderry, New Hampshire area who's working on legislation or, meeting with legislators, because when I move up there, I'd like to do that.
Yeah, reach out to us, Janet, and we'll see what we can do, because all it takes is for you to request a meeting with your state rep and your senator, and then we'll just come. I mean, you know a lot about this stuff because you've been in touch for a long time now. But we can come help do the heavy lifting. It just takes a constituent in the district to make the request for the meeting and to join us. Okay.
So my question about the Faraday cage was really like was mentioned on another person's experience with senior living, that there's a modem in each apartment, a wireless modem for each separate apartment. So I'll be on the top floor, but I'll have somebody under me. I was wondering if you try to wrap the modems, I saw something online about this. Doesn't that just stop the signal altogether? And then that won't help the person who's relying on their wireless. I'm gonna hardwire with cables.
Yeah. So I'm not certified to give you that kind of advice,
Okay.
but somebody like Jeremy Johnson, you can just book a half hour with him and he'll talk you through exactly what you need to know. Unless there's somebody here who's already done that and would like to just raise their hand, or Deb, if you know the right answer to that. Because shielding is tricky, and I'd hate to give any kind of advice that might cause a signal to bounce back and wallop you twice.
Yeah,
Right.
okay, great, thanks. Well, I'll be in touch later this fall.
Yeah, or go out to the Building Biology Institute, and they have building biologists around the country.
Allison,
Yes, and do you know Phyllis Traver? Your
I
service-
do. I
Yes.
hired
Yeah.
Phyllis to come into my house.
me
many
too.
years ago.
Me too. I've
Yeah.
had her more than once. And as I was building, she's consulted to keep
Yeah.
it.
So
Safe
she could
too.
give you good advice too.
So that's why I was thinking I would call her. Okay,
Good.
great, thanks.
All right, next question.
Who's next? Who'd I miss? Oh, Anne asked a question about the meter that was used for Pittsfield.
Mhm. That is the Safe and Sound Pro 2 from Safe Living Technologies. And anybody who has a library card in their region's network, they can go borrow that from the Pittsfield Library. Unfortunately, here in my town of Ashland, because it came from a special grant fund that's just for Ashland residents, our meter only goes out to people in Ashland.
The second part of her question, Cece, was, does the meter Cece uses work with the kind of outside frequencies invading a whole house?
Yes, for the most part. So it depends on what frequencies are invading in your neighborhood. This meter is really good for 3G and 4G. And 5G is actually a combination of a whole bunch of different frequencies that are also used in 3G and 4G. Plus, in some cases, these new millimeter waves. So if 5G is in your area, this meter will tell you, because it's a combination of frequencies, and this one picks up a lot of them. There are new meters coming onto the market. I know Safe Living Technologies is taking pre-orders right now for a meter that does measure millimeter waves as well. So this is still a pretty good meter, unless you have to specifically know about the millimeter waves.
Anne has her hand raised.
Hi, Ann. Go ahead and unmute.
Hi, thank you. I asked about that meter because what I discovered is that a couple of blocks behind my house, they have put up a macro tower. And what happens is I am getting blasted at night. It can come on from 9 o'clock anywhere as late as like in the wee hours of the morning, 1, 2, 3 a.m. And most people are sound asleep then and they don't hear it. But my house is absolutely a buzz with the noise from this thing. I think it's coming from that. And you can feel the air vibrating. You can feel the frequencies going right through you.
Oh, my goodness.
And I'd like to find a way to measure that because it's so bad.
Yeah, you know what you might do is engage a building biologist, because even once you have the measurements, your next question is going to be, what can I do about this?
Yep. And I
so-
have metal siding on my house, which doesn't help anything.
Well, sometimes it can provide a shield, but if you have things radiating in your living space that are then hitting that metal,
Yep.
then it's going to bounce back and wallop you twice.
And I have smart meters. That town has had them in Braintree for 13 years.
Here in
But it's only with
Massachusetts.
the institution of 5G, I think, that it's really going to start to be more dangerous. And I just had a Comcast technician come out to the house, and he told me that they are not allowed to scale any pole that has a 5G transmitter or whatever on top, because they could get cooked if they do. So I said, I didn't know that.
Oh my goodness. You know what you might do is connect with Patricia Burke. If you shoot me an email, I'll put you in touch with Patricia, and just remind me what your situation is, because she's been noticing there are new frequencies in Millis, Massachusetts as well.
Okay.
that she is hearing them and she is feeling them. So
It's bad. Yeah, it's really
Yeah.
bad.
So I think you do well to hook up with Patricia and compare notes with her too.
Thank you. I'll do that.
Okay, thanks so much. Okay. Any other questions or comments or successes? You know, if you guys are doing things and you're finding that things work, we always love to share those stories too. Okay. Alistair, oh, we have Alistair, who is a gentleman who's entering the building biology profession as we speak. Go ahead and unmute, Alistair.
Hey, how are you?
Good,
This
thanks.
is kind of an aside, but I noticed that someone was on the call earlier by the name of George Carlo. I don't know if that was the George Carlo.
Yes, it was.
Oh, okay. Yeah, too bad he seems to have left, but
Yeah, he pops in every now and then.
Dr. Havas was on as well.
Oh, good. Well,
Good.
this is encouraging.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah. So Deb, in the future, if you notice, or Alistair, if you notice, because of the way we structure these webinars, we do the education up front and then we do the Q&A on the back. I had seen that George Carlo had joined us and it was right before we went live and I was composing a little personal direct message to him through the chat to see if he came on for a purpose, if there was something he wanted to say, or if he was just coming in to say hi. But I didn't get all the way through that communique because we got started. So Deb, if you or Alistair, if any of you guys ever recognize some of our scientists or doctors, feel free to poke them and say, is there something you want to say before we get to Q&A?
Yeah.
Because once I'm up and running, I'm not monitoring anything. So I wouldn't have known if he responded to me. Okay, everybody. Well, thank you so much for your time. And we're so grateful for everything that you're doing on the ground. And if there's anything that we can do to help, please just reach out. And all of our events are posted out at Massachusetts for Safe Technology on our events page. We've got a couple coming up next week. So on the 19th, I'll be doing the monthly Massachusetts for Safe Technology Zoom call at noon on Wednesday. And then on Wednesday night, I'm going to be out in Chester, Massachusetts from 6 to 8 p.m. with Eileen Duane, who's following the lead from Sheffield and Great Barrington. And she has just gotten a town warrant article put on to put a pause on any more wireless build out until the FCC fulfills its court mandated order. And so I'll be there giving a tech safety talk next Wednesday night in Chester. And then on Thursday evening in Great Barrington, Nina Anderson from Sheffield and Catherine Levin will be giving a presentation about the warrant articles that they're doing in those two towns as well. So that's on the 20th in the evening. And on the 24th, which is the following Monday, Deb and I will be doing another one of these free public education webinars. And let's see, there's another one in here somewhere. Oh, out in Worcester, Massachusetts, I'll be presenting to a women's group called the Polka Dot Powerhouse on Wednesday, the 26th from 4 to 6 p.m. And then there may be an event coming up on the 27th that Patricia Burke and Courtney Gilardi are starting to talk about organizing for these town warrants. And then on the 28th in Upton, Massachusetts, we'll be doing a part 2 for a public education forum because Lori Woden in Upton has also introduced a town warrant article to put a pause on any more wireless build out until the FCC fulfills its court-ordered mandate. So yeah, busy month, but this is our happy place. We love getting out and educating. So if we can do that in your community, please just let us know how we can coordinate with you. All right, everybody, have a lovely evening. Enjoy our summer day tomorrow. And we'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
everybody.